There is a moment that keeps a lot of people stuck for far longer than they ever admit to themselves. It doesn't look dramatically from the outside. It doesn't look like failure. It doesn't look like giving up. It just sounds like I'm almost there. I just need a bit more clarity. I want to prepare properly, right? I start when I'm more confident. And that state can last much longer than people expect. Not just days or weeks, but sometimes months or even years. You keep circling the thing. You think about it, you refine it, you imagine how you are going to do it, and replay the first step in your head over and over again. You watch other people doing something similar. You try to mentally become the version of yourself who is already doing it. But the real beginning never comes, because underneath all of that thinking, you're still waiting to feel ready. And that one thing is the biggest delay in the entire builder's journey, because the truth is simple but hard to accept. For most meaningful things in life, you will not feel ready first. You will feel uncertain, clumsy, exposed, and underprepared. You will feel like you're missing something. And then, if you move anyway, readiness starts to grow after the fact. Not all at once, not in a dramatic moment, but piece by piece through contact with reality. This is the episode 5 of the Builder's Playbook, where we break down what it actually takes to build something real from zero. And today we are talking about a shift that can quietly save people years. You need to build before you feel ready, not recklessly, not blindly, but before the feeling arrives. Because if you keep waiting for intel and permission, you may end up waiting forever. A lot of people think readiness is a feeling, a clean one, a stable one. They imagine there will be a day when everything finally clicks into place. The fear drops, the doubt comes down, their skills feel good enough, their plan makes sense, and something inside them finally says, yes, now I'm ready. That's the picture people hold in their head. But real life, especially if it comes to building something meaningful, almost never follows that pattern. Because if something actually matters to you, it will activate something in you. It will bring up resistance. It will bring up hesitation. It will bring up doubt. Not because something is wrong, but because meaningful things always come with a cost. They ask for exposure, they ask for responsibility, they ask for effort, they ask for the possibility of embarrassment, the possibility of silence, the possibility that your first attempt won't match the version of you that you had in your mind. So, of course, you don't feel fully ready. Why would you? You are standing at the edge of something new, something untested, something that can reveal your current level, something that can challenge the way you see yourself. And the problem is not that people feel that discomfort. That part is normal. The problem is how they interpret it. They interpret uncertainty as a signal to wait. They think, if I don't feel clear, I shouldn't start yet. But very often, uncertainty doesn't mean not yet. It simply means this is real. And real things don't come with perfect emotional conditions. That's exactly what makes them real. So if you build your life around the rule of I only move when I feel ready, you will spend a lot of time standing still, because the things that matter most often trigger the most hesitation. That's not a flaw. That's part of the structure of growth. The goal is not to eliminate hesitation. The goal is to stop obeying it automatically, to stop treating it like a command. I know this pattern pretty well. That strange space where you can already see the next move, you know what would help, you know what needs to be done, and you can almost feel the direction. And still, there is this part of you that tries to buy more time. Not because you're lazy, not because you don't care, but because starting makes it real. And once it's real, you can no longer hide inside the idea of it. Now your current level is visible. Now your voice is visible. Now your thinking is visible. And your discipline is visible too. And that shift from imagination to reality is where a lot of people hesitate. So what happens? You refine a little more. You think one more round. You adjust the plan. You improve something small. You tell yourself you are being responsible. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's just fear wearing a more intelligent mask. And that's what makes it difficult. Fear doesn't always show up as fear. It shows up as strategy, as preparation, as doing things probably. It says things like, let's make this plan stronger first. This needs more polish. Let's wait for a better week. I'll start when I feel more like myself. And if you are someone who thinks a lot, that voice sounds reasonable. It sounds like you are being careful. It sounds like you are being smart. But at some point at your life, you have to learn the difference between wise preparation and diligent avoidance. Because one leads to movement, the other leads to delay that feels productive. And that distinction is not always obvious in the moment. That's why so many people stay stuck in that loop for way too long, because it doesn't feel like they're avoiding anything. It feels like they're doing the right thing. Waiting feels convincing for a reason. First, it protects your self-image. As long as you haven't started, there's no evidence. Nobody can judge your work, not even you. You can still believe that you would do it well, right? You can still believe that you are capable of it. But the moment you create something real, that protection disappears. Now there's something to look at, something that reflects your current level, your skill set, and that can be uncomfortable. The second thing is waiting allows you to preserve the fantasy. In your mind, the future version of the project is still clean, still strong, still impressive, still full of potential. But the moment you begin, it becomes messy, and many people prefer a clean, imaged version over a rough, real one. Because the imagined version doesn't challenge them, it doesn't expose them, it doesn't contradict their self image. The third thing is that waiting creates the illusion of control. If you delay long enough, maybe you can eliminate the risk. Maybe you can think your way into a better starting point. Maybe you can avoid the awkward phase entirely. But you can't. Every builder has a stage where they're learning in reality, not just in theory. There's no clean way around it. There's just only one through it. And once you really understand that, something shifts in your head. You stop negotiating with the early stage. You stop expecting it to look good. And you begin to understand that the first version is not supposed to be impressive. It is supposed to exist. That's it. Existence first, refinement later. That shift alone can save you years. Because once something exists, you can improve it, adjust it, shape it. But as long as it only exists in your head, it stays untouched. And untouched things don't evolve. They just stay perfect in imagination and useless in reality. And this leads to one of the most important ideas in the entire builder process. Readiness is not something you discover, it is something you build. You build it through action, through repetition, through contact. And that matters because most people treat readiness like something they need to have up front. They think like, once I feel ready, I will start. But in reality, readiness is often the result of starting. You record the first video, it feels awkward, but now the second one feels slightly less intimidating. You post your first piece of content, it feels exposed, but now your mind stops treating it like a massive event. You speak to the first person, it feels uncertain, but now the next conversation feels more normal to you. You build the first version, it's not perfect, but now you actually understand what needs to be improved. This is how readiness forms, not as a feeling that appears out of nowhere, but as a byproduct of repeated action. And this is where things become more practical, because it means you don't have to solve your emotions before you move. You don't have to wait until everything feels aligned internally. You just need enough clarity to take one real step. That's it. One step that brings you into contact with your reality. Because once you are in contact, things start changing. The fear becomes more specific. The uncertainty becomes more manageable. The process becomes more real. And slowly that feeling of I'm not ready starts losing its power. Not because it disappears, but because it gets replaced by experience. And that's the real shift. Now you suddenly feel confident, not when everything finally makes sense, but when you start moving, desperate, not feeling ready. And this is where a lot of people expect something dramatic to happen. They imagine there will be a clear internal movement where everything aligns, when fear disappears or when motivation becomes stable, where they finally feel like, now I'm the type of person who does this. But that moment rarely comes the way they expect it. What actually happens is much quieter. You take a step while still feeling uncertain, then another one, and slowly Almost without noticing it at first, your identity begins to adjust around your action, not the other way around. Because identity doesn't change through thinking alone, it changes through evidence. Repeated proof, showing yourself again and again that you can act even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't feel ideal. That's the part most people underestimate. They think confidence is required to start, but in reality, confidence is built by starting. It's built through exposure, repetition, by doing the things enough times that it stops feeling foreign and starts feeling familiar. But before that shift completely stabilizes, you run into another layer of resistance. And this one is more subtle because it doesn't look like feel, it looks like control. The desire of control how things unfold, to control how you are perceived, to control the outcome before you even begin. And that desire is understandable. Nobody wants to look unprepared, right? Nobody wants to feel behind. Nobody wants to create something and have it fall flat. So the mind tries to manage that risk by delaying action, by thinking its way into a better starting position, or by trying to remove uncertainty before stepping into it. But here's the problem: control is extremely limited at the beginning. You don't control how good your first version is. You don't control how people respond. You cannot control whether it feels aligned with your core values right ahead. What you control is whether you start, or you continue, or you stay enough in the process to see something form. And that's a completely different focus. And this is where most people simply give up. They don't just wait for readiness, they wait for certainty. They want to know that the effort leads somewhere. They want reassurance that this is the right direction. They want a sign that they are not wasting time. But that kind of certainty doesn't exist at the beginning. Builders don't get guarantees, they get feedback. And feedback only comes after action. So if you are waiting for certainty, you are waiting for something that only shows up later, which means you stay at the start, repeating the same loop, thinking, adjusting, delaying. Over time, that loop becomes familiar, almost comfortable, not because it feels good, but because it feels known. You know how to think, right? You know how to analyze, you know how to refine, but you don't fully step into the part where things become unpredictable. And unpredictable is actually where growth happens. Because once you start, things don't go exactly how you imagine it. Something feels harder than expected. Something doesn't land the way you thought. Something takes longer. Something feels off, right? And that's where real learning begins. Not in the idea, but in the interaction with reality. That's where your thinking becomes sharper because it's grounded in experience, not theory. And this is where people who start earlier often move faster later. Not because they are more talented, but because they enter the feedback loop sooner. They stop guessing and instead they start seeing it. They stop imagining and start adjusting. They compounds over time. Small corrections, repeated consistently, eventually lead to something strong. But you only get access to those corrections if you are willing to step into the phase where things are not clear yet. And that phase is where most people turn back because it feels uncomfortable. It feels like you're doing something wrong. It feels like maybe this isn't it after all. And this is where another pattern shows up: the need for things to feel right before continuing. People start something, try once or twice, and when it doesn't feel smooth, when it doesn't feel aligned, when it feels awkward, they step back again and they interpret it as friction, as a signal to stop. But most of the time, it's not a signal to stop, it's a signal that you are early. And the early stage is supposed to feel off. It's supposed to feel like you're figuring things out. It's supposed to feel incomplete because you are. That's a fact. And if you expect that stage to feel clean, you will keep jumping from one idea to the next, always chasing something that feels better in the beginning. But real builders don't chase that feeling, they build through it. They understand that clarity is not a starting condition, it's something that forms over time through repetition, through contact, through staying in the process long enough that it feels comfortable. And this is where patience becomes real. Not passive patience, Not waiting, but active patience. The ability to stay with something long enough for it to develop, long enough for you that your skills catch up, long enough for you that your thinking can sharpen, long enough for your output to improve. And this is difficult because everything around you makes it seems like things should happen faster. You see finished results, polished outputs, and people who look like they figured it out quickly, but you don't see the early phases, the repetitions, and the messy versions of them. And because of that, your own process feels slower than it actually is. And that can push you back into hesitation, back into the thinking loop, back into the waiting. But people who built something real are not the ones who avoided that phase. They are the ones who stayed in it, the ones who kept going, even when it didn't feel impressive, even when it didn't feel clear, even when it didn't feel rewarding yet. So at some point, the shift becomes very simple. You stop asking, do I feel ready? And start asking, what is the next real step that I can take now? Not the perfect step, not the smartest step, not the most optimized step, just the next real one that moves you from thinking into doing. And then you take it, even if it feels small, even if it feels incomplete, even if it feels slightly uncomfortable, because small, real steps change your situation. Perfect, imaginated ones don't. And once you take that step, something important happens. The problem becomes clearer. You stop dealing with abstract uncertainty and start dealing with real feedback. You see what works and what doesn't, what needs to change, and that clarity is more valuable than any amount of thinking before action. And this is exactly the point where a different kind of confidence starts forming. Not loud confidence, not the kind that feels strong all the time, but the quieter one, the kind that comes from experience, from having moved before, from knowing that even if things feel uncertain, you can still act. And that changes your relationship with action. You stop needing the perfect internal state. You stop waiting for alignment. You stop treating hesitation as a stop sign. And instead, you start seeing it as part of the process. Something that's there but doesn't control you. And this is one thing that changes everything over the long term because now you are not waiting anymore. You are building. And that's the real difference. So, if there's one thing to take from this, it should be this. Readiness is not something you wait for, it's something you build. And the only way to build it is by stepping into the process before you feel ready. Not perfectly, not confidently, but honestly. You take the next step, you stay with it, you adjust, you continue, and slowly that version of you that you have been waiting for starts to form through your actions. So instead of asking yourself, am I ready? Ask something simpler. What is one step I can take today that makes this real? Not perfect, not impressive, just real. And then do that because that's how this starts. Not with certainty, not with confidence, but with one simple movement, one simple step. And once you start moving, everything else begins to follow.